So the way that this will go is Elisa will give her presentation, and then there'll be plenty of time for conversations, questions, whatever comes up for you. We'll have some time to get into some of that. I think that's all my bits. So let me say this. Welcome, Elisa. It's really exciting to have you here with us. Elisa is a master celebrant with certifications in weddings, funerals, healings, and ceremonies across the life cycle. She has designed, developed, and implemented professional training courses, sales, and motivational seminars for groups of all sizes in many different modalities, and is a published poet, which is super exciting because I love poets. They're always the best. So thanks so much, Elisa, once again for being here. You know, we decided to have this particular conversation because it seems like in all of the other conversations that we've been having during COVID times, the question keeps coming up, like how, like what are we doing if we can't touch bodies? What are we doing if we can't get together? And so it seems like whatever other conversation we're having in NHFA webinar land, somehow it always comes back around to ideas that people are coming up with to create meaning and ritual in different ways than we're used to doing. I feel like, you know, the essence of home funerals and being a home funeral guide is encouraging touch, right? We're all about understanding that we move trauma when we touch, when we hold bodies, when we feel the weight of reality on our hands. That's our language as home funeral educators. And so we're in this really strange place right now where there's conflicting wisdom about touch and its place. And so we had the great idea to, actually Sarah Jane had the great idea of calling Elisa Chase and asking her to talk about those things for us. So again, super grateful that you're here, Elisa. And I think that we will learn tons tonight. So take it away.
Cool beans. Thanks for having me. I am also really happy to be here. So tonight we are going to be talking about going the distance and sustaining the craft of rituals to serve our clients and ourselves during this global pandemic. And I am Elisa Chase. I'm not the chick you'll find if you Google me. Which we just had a fun joke about for those of you who weren't here. I'm a solopreneur. I'm a certified master life cycle celebrant. I am the director of academics at the Celebrant Foundation and Institute. We are an online training program that teaches officiants and group and community leaders the art and science of story-centric ritual and ceremony. We've been in business for 20 years and I've been on staff for 5. I'm a total geek about ritual and ceremony theory, as many of my colleagues who are on the line tonight would attest to. I am also a practicing celebrant. I have been for 10 years, during which time I created and officiated about 600 ceremonies of a lot of different types, including funerals. I'm also a workaholic. I'm a yoga failure. I'm a connector. I'm a facilitator. I'm very dead body averse. I'm the mom of 5 mostly grown kids. I'm a civil rights and LGBTQ supporter. I'm a coffee addict. I'm a ballroom dancer. I'm often a renegade, and I enthusiastically lead from my heart. Why am I telling you all of this? Because I think you deserve to know a little bit about me before we spend time plumbing some stuff tonight. And I want you to know that wherever we go tonight, whatever the conversation we have, I'm with you. So tonight we're going to talk, thanks to Danny and to Sarah Jane and the National Home Funeral Alliance for allowing me to come in as a dead body wimp and talk about grief and loss and distance and frustration and exhaustion and our shared commitment to sacred callings. But that's okay, don't worry, you're in the right Zoom room. We are going to talk about ritual, but I want to start first by unpacking some stuff so that we can talk about ritual, the way it helps clients articulate and define and adjust things like grief and loss and frustration and messy pandemics and the heaviness of the lifting that goes with all of that. You know, rituals have been part of the death experience and continuum since at least the dawn of time. They're one of the most universally common elements of the death experience across all races, cultures, ethnicities, and belief systems. I don't mean the rituals themselves, I mean the space and the place of ritual is universally present in almost all death experiences. Rituals are a part of what home funeral guides assist with. They're part of the formal and informal ceremonies that celebrants create or assist with. We're all trained one way or another to help people along this ultimate rite of passage and to provide support and care to loved ones and caregivers, often in a very ritualistic setting. And we were blindsided. Our communities, as individuals, as service providers, we've been hit with something that we never really saw coming. I used to be a business consultant, and for a time I specialized in business continuity and disaster preparedness. I've actually written award-winning disaster preparedness and business continuity plans for states and for medical centers. And you know, when you plan for a disaster, you really do it blindly. You're essentially imagining all the monsters under our collective beds that would come to visit, maybe alone, maybe all at the same time. And my personal level of hypervigilance matched with my anxiety made me exceptionally good at that job. But in all the disasters I helped teams imagine and prepare for, of all the Pandora's boxes we opened, never once did I hear anybody at any level say, you know, like, maybe we need to prepare to let go of one another, like untether ourselves from the comforts of proximity and learn how to go the distance with a little bit or maybe a whole lot of distance. I mean, we foresaw it in terms of facilities and medical centers and PPEs and isolation, and we saw it in terms of small or isolated concerns during contagion. And I know that there were people who, in fact, wrote and drafted plans for global pandemics, but none of them, and nowhere have we talked about what it's like to try to sustain an entire country, continent, or globe's psyches and emotional needs during the most defining moments of people's lives in a touch and proximity vacuum. But here we are, alone, together, apart, but tethered. And the social distancing thing, it's harder than we ever imagined it could be. But there are strategies for managing risk from a business perspective. You can accept the risk and keep on with business as usual, which is unfortunately kind of what the Trump administration is doing down here in the United States. Or you can accept the risk, knowing that it may come to pass, and decide it's too catastrophic and not move forward at all, which is what we did at the very early parts of the pandemic. Or you can adjust and mitigate your services to be able to continue to provide them as safely as possible in the midst of a disaster. And that's pretty much where we are right now. And the reason why I'm talking about this is I think we can actually leverage some of the strategies from business and from the non-home funeral industry and from folks like celebrants and ritual diviners to move us forward and to help you continue to provide your services in the safest possible way in the middle of a disaster. And it really comes down to adaptation. So can we adapt rituals? Can we change rituals? How does that happen? I think before we can talk about changing them, we probably have to exchange a mutual definition of what a ritual is. You know, rituals are purposeful actions performed by people with the intention to bring higher meaning to their experience. Sometimes that's illogical, sometimes it's magical, always it's wonderful. The biggest difference between a repetitive act like brushing your teeth and a ritual is the intention ascribed to the meaning of the action. So it's possible to create a ritual around brushing your teeth, or even to use brushing your teeth as a ritual. All that takes is forethought and intention. It's not the action, it's the thought behind the action that's more important in terms of ritual creation. It's the desire to connect this activity to a higher purpose. And there is kind of a nuance about how ritual is different from any other kind of human behavior. Barbara Meyerhoff explains in her salient work on secular rituals that it's about marking out special moments that have meaning, in which the people involved are aware that something special is going on. The most salient characteristic of rituals is its function as a frame. It is a deliberate and yet artificial demarcation. In ritual, a bit of behavior or interaction, an aspect of social life, a moment in time is selected, stopped, and remarked upon, internally or externally, or both. It's making the ordinary extraordinary for a period of time. And that's the magic of ritual. It's time travel, because rituals help us create connection. They help us, they help people mindfully embrace what's happening and their feelings about it. What's sacred about ritual time and place is that it slows or even stops time as we live outside the ticking clock for a period. To acknowledge the emotions, to live in memory or nostalgic connection, to focus deeply on the present, to exclude external interruption. Rituals, they empower us to decide what we'll do, think, experience, focus on within a contained time and frame. And it's truly precious. I mean, how often in a span of a 24-hour day do we get to do that? The gift of time to choose what we focus on, to live within the experience of that. And we know that rituals can be done alone or in community with others. And when we do so in community with others, there are even more gifts and opportunities that present themselves. What I'd like to bring to this conversation tonight and to this group tonight, and I love that it's a whole diverse group, is a slight paradigm shift of how ritual creation can be accomplished. For some, it might be radical. For some, it might seem as normal as the air we breathe. But what I want to do is I want to marry business continuity and ritual creation theory and give you all a bit of a roadmap to help you adjust and adapt ritual in this time of social distancing. A really common process and train of thought when constructing a ritual experience is to first look at the structure and the prescribed format of a known ritual. There's books, there's websites, there's podcasts, there's YouTube channels on how-tos, how to do rituals, how to do guided meditations, how to do journaling, how to smudge, how to cleanse. Every ritual ever imagined or ever enacted, there's a guide and a how-to. The prevailing thought has been that to use ritual, it means we have to learn about the ritual and then retrofit it to match the environment and the constraints, with the goal of reenacting this standard ritual as closely as possible to the way it's been prescribed. So it's all about trying to adhere to some ritual recipe or a manual or scripted actions. And that's where care for the body and following guidelines and procedures for everyone's comfort and ritual activity actually diverge in terms of theory. Because as celebrants, we actually flip the switch here. We kind of flip the whole script. Before we decide on a ritual for a client, before we go to any manual, before we do any research on any ritual, first we ask clients questions, the depth and the breadth of which can change depending on how much time we have with the client and the depth of emotion that we're working with. But one way or another, we want to know, what are you wanting to receive from this ritual or ceremony? Why are you doing it? Do you want to include rituals to be part of it? Are you attracted to rituals, open to rituals? When did you want to try to include them? We ask about their perspectives on the afterlife or spiritual connections or not. And we ask about what they like or don't like, what they want to include or definitely need to exclude. So before we even consider a ritual, we first consider the people or the person that the rituals will serve and what their intentions are. But we ask in less obvious ways because, not everybody speaks celebrant. And we get that. But what we're really looking for is we're really looking to understand what a client's intentions are and what their needs are so that we can start to craft a ritual from this recipe. When we know what they want, when we know what they need, when we know what they're comfortable with, when they know what they're attracted to, when we know what their alignment is, when we know what they're interested in, when we know what they do in their real outside of sacred space life, we can craft ritual that's meaningful to them. And then we can adjust the delivery. So rather than trying to adjust what the client wants by saying, geez, we can't do that, we're so constrained because of COVID, because of public health laws, because of social distancing, we say, no, that's okay. What the client wants or needs is sacred. Let's figure out how we can work around that by adjusting the delivery. So we have to also think about what those constraints are, but we'll talk about that later. So in terms of adjusting rituals, we do have some tools. We can reinvent and reimagine. We can mirror activities for remote families, and we can also learn some lessons from the outside. If we look at rituals for after-death vigiling, and for my colleagues from CFNI who are on the line tonight for the first time, let me just give you a definition of what the term home vigil means when we're talking to home funeral guides, because it's not exactly the same as what we consider it in celebrant land. The term home vigil, also known as lying in honor or visitation as used here, is the period between death and the final disposition of the body that may include family and community visitation in the home or a place of rest for the purpose of acknowledging the death, supporting the family, and validating grief while offering the opportunity for private goodbyes. So vigiling here is the extended period of time that the body is in the home with the family. It's not just a ritual of vigiling. The entire experience is considered the home vigil. Within the decision of the family who chooses to keep their loved one home, there's time. And with that time, there's opportunity for a number of rituals that go beyond or even outside of touch, washing the body, bathing the body. We have the opportunity to help people decide what's meaningful to them and to empower them to manage this in any way that's comfortable for them over an extended length of time. There's so much that can be created and offered. If I were a home funeral guide, and with my clear issues about dead bodies, we know that's not going to happen, but during preparation with the client, I'd start to ask questions about their vision and their hopes for the experience, about what they want to fill those final days and moments with. I'd ask them what they find comforting and meaningful. I'd ask them what they don't want to do. When my dad and my brother died, I did not want to touch the body. That didn't mean I didn't want to be there. That didn't mean I wouldn't or couldn't do a home funeral. It just means I wouldn't be touching the body. But that's okay, because that's what I'd want to know. I'd want to know what is meaningful for you, what will bring you relief, what is it you want to express. For some clients, I imagine they'd check off everything on these lists. And yet, for other clients, I also imagine that some would want to sit wrapped in their loved one's favorite sweater, listening to show tunes, and maybe making a meal of French toast because that was their favorite meal. The idea is that we can help our clients view these activities as ritually meaningful by asking them, what's important to you? What's meaningful to you? What's the hardest thing you're going to have to do? What do you believe in? What brings you comfort? Where do you find support? What could bring you relief? And when we ask all those questions, we get more than just that whiteboarded list of ritual opportunities that I just gave you, which were much more like actions than they were like actual rituals. You know, every ritual ever crafted or created by anybody or any group, anywhere, anytime, always comes down to the four universal elements and the metaphors and symbols of earth, air, fire, and water. I'd love to say that this is my personal theory because I think it's fabulous, but it's not. It's actually the work of Dr. Ronald Grimes, who's a contemporary ritual theorist. When we know that we just need to work within the concept of earth, air, fire, and water and match it to what our clients need or want, what they are drawn to or repelled by, what they're looking for, what their goals are, what their intentions are, then we can take that standard list that I just gave you and we can actually match it to ritualistic activities and ritualistic actions that are meaningful, not just in general, but meaningful to our clients. Because remember, I told you, like, as a celebrant, we focus on the client. We focus on what they want. We focus on what they're looking for. We focus on what makes them unique. And so rather than going out to those guides and those how-to manuals to match what the clients say they want, the outcome, with some pre-written, pre-drafted, preconceived, pre-done, pre-scripted ritual, instead, we fill those blanks with what's natural and comfortable to each client uniquely. And by thinking through and crafting or giving clients the basic outlines for a ritual, we actually free ourselves from some heavy concerns of cultural appropriation, because what we're asking our clients to do is connect authentically to the things that are meaningful to them. And we're going to help them craft rituals in terms of the items that are meaningful and important to them. We're maybe an heirloom bowl or pictures or their own fireplace, their own fire pit, maybe sand, gravel, rocks from their own backyard. Items that are culturally or ethnically specifically drawn from their own groups, like a family tartan, a broom handed down from parents and grandparents. So by directly attributing all of those items in ritual to the person or the family or the group, we avoid cultural appropriation or the fear of accidentally falling into cultural appropriation by accident, by not knowing, because we're driving this directly at the client's own sense of authenticity. You know, the most challenging thing, I think, in working with clients in terms of crafting ritual is that sometimes we don't know, or we're unsure if the things that they want to do are actually from their own group or their own culture or ethnicity. I live on the sacred land of the Mohegans, here in Connecticut, and it's not uncommon for folks like me of mixed European heritage to want to use Native American acts, symbols, or rituals because they have an affinity for that culture and that lore because we grew up so close to it. We could have an entire conference call dedicated to the management of cultural appropriation, and I'm always about having those calls. But for the sake of focus tonight, because we really want to focus directly on the ritual aspects of adaptation, I'm just going to leave it with, no matter what, we're always wanting to keep our eyes and our ears open to avoiding cultural appropriation. But when we craft ritual that's very personal, when we craft and we give our clients input and we ask them what's important to you, we often find that we fill the gap. We fill their need to look outward to other things because we're going to craft from what comes within their hearts and in their souls and what's sacred to each unique client. And it certainly brings us much farther to a safer space in terms of cultural appropriation than when we sit back and try to match the client to the ritual, or match the ritual to the client instead of the client to the ritual. So here's a broad whiteboard, so to speak, of ritual activities that can be personalized during home vigils. It's a small list. This isn't a ritual workshop, but it would be fun to have one. But it gives ideas and examples of how we can move from that pre-scripted written actions into more personalized space. And again, ethically, we would never suggest activities that put people or the environment at risk before, during, or after COVID. You know, if people are living in an arid fire risk and area and they want to burn something, they have to do it in their own bathtub or their own sink. There's always ways to adapt. There's always an adaptive strategy. When I think about distance and I think about the impact of COVID-19, especially where we are right now, not where we were in March and April, and not where we might be next March or April, it seems like the biggest impact right now is the restriction on sharing space or the number of people that can share space. And that forces people into really difficult positions. It forces them into the position of having to choose who can stay and who has to go, who can stay in the home, the room, the environment, or who, though we expected, wanted, would have had them here, can't be here. Mirroring is a technique that helps us go the distance. When we have to limit the number of people who can be in the home or be involved, we can do what I call mirroring. So if your family, if your client family is comfortable with technology, with live streaming, or with Zoom, or with any kind of ability to even call somebody, you can live stream those actions and pull people in from a distance. Zoom, by the way, I'm sure you all know because you're all on top of this, 40 minutes for free, but for $20, you can do a Zoom call for 24/7 for an entire month. And it's probably $20 very well spent if your clients are capable of managing, setting it up and just turning the computer so that it shows the room so that everybody can see. Nobody has to even run it. Just open it up and show. When you can do that, the people who are stuck at a distance can mirror what's happening and can take part in what's going on. So even though they can't touch the body, they can touch themselves. They can touch their own clothes, their hair, a favorite object, their pet, their hand. They can groom. They can brush their own hair, trim their own nails, change their own clothes into a sacred outfit. For memorializing, live stream participants can be included in any activities that are happening at the bedside or in the home. For any activity done in the home that doesn't involve the body, maybe it can be done remotely. So that even something like cooking. So if people decide that as a family they want to cook a sacred meal, I can mirror that activity in my own home even though I can't be there. Remote members can be encouraged to engage or craft their own individual ritual experience at the same time. So you can go through the same thing. So you knew that you were going to be there, and now you can't be there. Here's what's important to you. What do you need? What's important to you? What do you feel? What do you want to get from this? What are things that may bring you comfort? And they may need their own ritual bubble if they can't connect remotely somehow. And that's where I think we also can learn about some of the lessons from adaptations within the greater funeral industry or the non-home funeral industry. End-of-life ceremony has adapted very rapidly to the constraints of COVID, faster than I ever imagined it could possibly happen. It is not uncommon now for funeral homes to live stream, Zoom, or bring in their own private technology to live stream funerals. And I think that may be with us probably for a long time. Funeral homes have invested a lot of money in it, and what it's done is it's empowered us to bring people into end-of-life ceremony that traditionally have been disconnected from it. People who are too frail, people who are ill, people who are too far away, people who financially can't afford to bridge the distance. If you can get on the live feed, you can be a part of it. You can be connected. And it's extremely powerful. And it's interesting because 2 years ago, that was considered very crass. I remember watching somebody try to surreptitiously Facebook Live a funeral, and all the body language and all the nonverbal communication they got about how uncool that was. And now in funeral, it's like weddings. People have their phones right up next to their heads, and the funeral home tells you where their cameras are. They even bring their cameras remote into houses of worship. Funeral homes have also adapted, and communities have adapted to things like going outside. And while funeral homes are actually able to move bodies outside in a home environment, I'm not sure if that's actually logistically possible, but the family can go outside and they can see other people outside, because usually socially distanced regulations are easier and allow for more outside than inside. There are walkthroughs now. Funeral homes are having viewings where only one person can walk through the room with the body at the time, and everyone else stays out. And it's a very long process, but it does allow people to see each other face to face. There are drive-bys where the community gets together and drives past the funeral home or the home of the deceased. If people can open a window, if people can get to the front porch, they can actually see their friends and family, who often roll down the windows or come out the top of the sunroof. Honor guards, the act of having people park their cars along the route in which the vehicle with the body will travel to its final resting place, is a very solemn, very meaningful event when that's all you can have, to see your community parked along the lines, sometimes with people sitting or standing on top of their cars. Recordings and electronic condolences. So opening up something like a Facebook page just dedicated to the deceased and the death. So not using their personal Facebook page, but creating a Facebook page where people can leave their condolences, share memories, tell stories, record, send pictures. It helps bridge the gap. The really hard part for me as a non-home funeral celebrant, what I was least prepared for when I started doing ceremonies, funerals post-COVID, was how painful it is to see families together who can't touch. And to realize that it's not just about hugging, because I'm not a hugger, but it's about how when we are in grief, proximity gives us the opportunity for intimacy. And it's extremely painful to see people not be able to enjoy or engage or be able to provide that intimacy. Because sometimes that intimacy is about private conversations. It's about whispering in somebody's ear. It's about a conversation you only want to have with a couple of people to share a thought or a memory, but you don't want to do it across a room or 6 feet away. We can make up for some of that with rituals like letter writing or wish paper or the recording of messages that will get played later. All of those help us bridge the gap between what we've had and what we have left. And the other thing that's kind of bouncing around in the funeral industry is the idea of delayed memorials. Will there be memorials, more memorials than we've ever had in 2021, or gosh forbid 2022 if it has to stretch out that long? Memorials are usually driven by celebrants since there's no body care or disposition required. But the idea is that people lost the opportunity in the early parts, especially of the pandemic, to have any kind of funeral, home or not home. Will memorials a year later take their place? And where and how will all of the death care providers fit into that space? So you might, if you don't have a celebrant on speed dial, you might want to start creating those connections. And celebrants, you definitely need to start creating connections with home funeral guides, because we're all part of a continuum. And how we continue to move forward is going to impact all of us. Because where we are now is not the same as where we were. It's not the same from location to location, and it's not the same as what it's going to be. And we're all going to need to remain flexible. We're all going to need to be able to move, adjust our rituals and our services as the pandemic continues to move and adjust within our communities. Kind of the worst case scenario is thinking back to, like March and April here in the Northeast, or this summer in Texas and California. It's unlikely that the harshest of realities will ever come to bear again. But even in the harshest of environments where our hospitals, our morgues, and our funeral homes were too overwhelmed to bring a body home, doesn't mean that a home funeral can't happen. I know that's probably kind of renegade radical for home funeral guides who, as we opened today, said are all about the touch. But if you can't have that, you shouldn't have to forego it completely, because there are rituals that allow families to still stay in vigil. It will be harder. It will be more intense. It will be more frustrating, but it's better than not having it at all. And we can work together to make that happen should we ever, all gods forbid, end up back in a place that we never, ever expected to be. Certainly for the next 6 to 12 months, we're likely to be in this adaptive phase where it's definitely not the worst of times. It's certainly not the best of times, but most home funerals will still be able and empowered to have their loved one home, to be able to spend vigil with them, and likely will need adaptation to reach out to those who can't be there and to make up for the community support that they may have hoped they would have gotten, but they can only now get from a distance. Part of this is that COVID is really compounding the feelings of grief and loss across the entire human experience. We're grieving what we have lost while we're grieving who we've lost or have lost. clients may need some kind of ritual that helps them articulate how they feel about the constraints, the loss of opportunity, the lack of control that they hoped or intended to have. It will allow them to work through and acknowledge and validate those underlying emotions. And this has to inform some of the rituals that we might suggest to clients, depending on how deeply they've been impacted and how that is overshadowing their ability to be in the space, to be in sacred space. If they're so angry about the fact that half the people they expected to be part of this can't be there, we can help them by helping them articulate that through any kind of ritual, through journaling, through speaking, through a variety of metaphors or symbols, depending on where they're at, that will help free them to still gain the opportunities and still participate in the ways that they can. So instead of not acknowledging it or silver lining it, we can acknowledge it through ritual. And it's impacting us too. COVID and its ensuing constrictions are taking a toll on everyone in the death care community, especially frontline grief workers. We're rarely mentioned or acknowledged by the community, which would be nice. Some of us are working pro bono or voluntarily. Some of us are working longer hours than ever. We're dealing with the grief of our clients. We're feeling our work sometimes is diminished because our options to our clients have been limited. We're feeling that depth and breadth of crisis, and we're interacting with professionals who are at risk or already in the stages of burnout. And it's really, really tough. And self-care is real, and it's really needed. You're your own client. And it's hard to have this conversation because self-care can be very polarizing. Some of us don't always invest in it or don't think we need it, and we're not even sure what it looks like. And some of us can't imagine what it's like not to invest in self-care. But this is my reminder and my validation. If you're working in end-of-life care during COVID-19, the impact of this pandemic is compounding your stress and your emotional reserve, whether you think it is or not. And regardless of where you are on the spectrum of belief or investment in self-care, the solution really has to be a personal connection to what helps you find support, express your grief, feel better, make it through. We have the ability to decide on rituals or routines or activities that meet us where we are, no matter where we are. I started out by telling you tonight that I'm a yoga failure. See, it really wasn't all that random. When I got sick with whooping cough back in 2015, I almost died. And I had a team of doctors tell me that I was so worn down and so worn out that my immune system pretty much sucked. And I got stuck in the cytokine storm that's happening with COVID patients. And I was in the hospital and I was on some serious drugs. And I was out of work for 5 months, and I didn't sleep laying down for about 9 months because I couldn't breathe. And when I finally started feeling better, I found out that I was left with a heart defect. And all of that really kind of kicks your ass, especially when you're someone like me who doesn't even think I need self-care. I'm fine, but it's my cautionary tale. I know I needed something. So I turned to yoga, right? Because that's the icon of self-care, and I wanted the best. And I sucked at it, not because my body wouldn't bend, but because my mind wouldn't bend. And when my mind did bend, I cried a lot in public. And my yoga class wasn't really all that therapeutic to my crying because it was like the big, ugly, gulping sobs. So shortly after that, I gave up on yoga and I went to the polar opposite. I went to ballroom dancing, which I hadn't done in 17 years and about 60 pounds. Yeah. And here's what happened. The ritual of getting ready to dance, of putting on my shoes, of feeling my feet, of touching the floor, of stretching my legs, of calming my mind. of letting go of all that was outside so that I could focus only on what was inside became my ritual. And in the motion of the waltz and even a really fast cha-cha, I really found heaven. And I relaxed. And it refueled me, not just physically, it refueled me emotionally. It refueled me intellectually, and it gave me the ability to focus again. It gave me the ability to take a break from my cerebral craziness and my emotional uptightness and my hypervigilance and my anxiety, but not my fear of dead bodies, for enough time to catch my breath. And so that's what I want to remind you about. Rituals are mindful, intentional acts that have the potential to affect us and connect us to our emotions. You can slow time or stop it for yourself, just like you do for your clients. I found my ritual magic by making me and my answers to my own questions the most important part of crafting my ritual. I found it by being able to fit it into my schedule. I found something that worked for me. I found something that was so sacred that the more I gave to it, the more it gave back to me. And I even made myself go back to dance competitions because it made me accountable to continue. I had to stay invested. I would make a fool of myself or lose a lot of money, or both. So I'm telling you, don't wait till you're really wicked sick to invest in self-care. Don't believe that all self-care looks, feels, or sounds the same. Don't stop if the first thing you try isn't working, or what you've been doing doesn't seem to be working for you anymore. Because you can find magic in your morning cup of coffee if you make it an act of intention that conveys personal meaning every single day. I know, because I do it. So where do we go from here? You know, these cultural and societal adjustments that have been made in 2020 and 2021 are expected to change a lot of what we do forever. Social distancing has pushed technology into overdrive. We expect to see ongoing leveraging of live streaming and the opportunity to draw people in and to let them participate in end-of-life care and end-of-life ritual and ceremony in ways they were never able to before. We're going to have to be flexible and adaptive in our life and death care rituals, because that's going to be part of it. And we're going to have to not forget to ever fuel our own engine with sustained self-care, because it doesn't look like the stress is going to be relieved anytime soon externally. So we need to find outlets for it internally. And I have some resources for you. Your very own website is amazing. I say this because I haven't been out to my own organization's website as often as you would think I would be. So if you haven't been out to your organization's website, you have some amazing videos out there on touch, on creating sacred space, on leveraging technology, on procedures for home funeral guides during COVID. Celebrant Foundation and Institute, we have on our homepage a free guide for people who are planning funerals during COVID-19 and beyond. Is it home-based? No, but it talks a lot about adaptation of ritual and adaptation of technology and adaptations to bridge the distance when we can't have what we used to have and what we've always known. We also have a YouTube channel full of conversations and presentations, including a 2-part presentation by Deb Goldman on self-care. You can follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, occasionally on Twitter. We don't tweet all that much. And you can also follow our blog, in which we discuss lots of industry relevant content, not just funeral, but ritual, and about being a solo practitioner, and what it's sort of the ins and outs of what we experience working out here in our craft. Your own community has dual certified folks who are both home funeral guides and certified life cycle celebrants. You all fit together like peanut butter and jelly. And so if you are looking for somebody who you want to talk to about ritual, or talk to about crafting ritual, or you want to work together with to reach outside the box, I can't recommend enough you all getting to know each other and marinating together. Deeply Into the Bone by Ronald Grimes on reinventing and reimagining rituals and avoiding cultural appropriation. Okay, it's a really big book, but if you're geeking on this, like I geek on this, that's where you should start geeking. The Art of Ritual by Beck and Metrick. A Ceremony Called Life, When Your Morning Coffee is as Sacred as Holy Water, by T.S. Sky. I thought it was right here. It's almost always right on my desk. It's a tiny, unassuming little book that's really very meaningful and can take you some great places. And there's me. You can get me at Celebrant Foundation and Institute. Here's my phone number. You can find me on my own website, elisachase.com. I don't look anything like the person you'll find if you Google, because if you Google my name, you find this like very lightly dressed young cheerleader. It's definitely not me. And so that's everything I brought to bring and wanted to give to you tonight. But I also wanted to make sure that we had time to talk or to chat or to ask or answer questions.
Wow, that was really fantastic, Lisa. Thank you so much. You really hit on all of the points that I was hoping that you would get to, and just so deeply. So thank you so much. We will, so we should be right around, I can't see my clock on my phone, but we should be right around 6 o'clock. So if anybody is needing to hop off but has a question, go ahead and type that into the chat and we'll make sure and get to it. And then you can watch the recording and hear your answer. And so what we can do is you can type questions into the chat, or you can say in the chat, I have a question. I know sometimes it's easier to speak your question than to type it. That you can go ahead and just let me know and I will call on you. I especially want to say I'm so grateful that you brought up the idea of like grieving inside of the grief, you know, that like really what's going on right now is these layers of complicated grief. It's like, you know, we keep talking about like zooming people in, you know, and yes, it's great, but I feel like we need to also be including like this layer of grief that like Zoom is what we have and it's not perfect and it's working and thank goodness for it, right? And we have to like include that element of grieving that we're Zooming instead of being together. And so I really appreciate how you spoke about that. And it reminded me of our last conference in Minnesota when the Minnesota Threshold Network folks set up this beautiful mock vigil. And so it was one of the rooms that you could go into. And I mean, they turned what was this like bleached white office space into like a Waldorf inspired home funeral room. There was, you know, a cardboard casket in the middle where people could paint and write words, and lamps and rugs and scar. And it was amazing how intentionally they transformed the space. And Sarah Cruz and I, just before the conference, like basically on the way to the conference, found out that a dear friend of ours who had been, you know, struggling with cancer for a year, a young mother, had died days before the conference, and neither of us really had time to pause and grieve that. They were far away anyway, and I remember Sarah and I commenting on what it felt like to walk into that mock vigil room. Kind of, you know, here we were like sort of running the NHFA conference and holding this little grief inside. And it was amazing to have this space, just this, having this empty casket in the room was able to be anybody's dead person, you know, and that you could really feel, you know, that person's not there. I don't have time to pause, or like it's a year later, but you can still create the image. The body recognizes that person is there. And I think Sarah and I know Sarah, you're here, but we were both so shocked at how being in that mock vigil room sort of translated us to this space where our friend had died, even though we were facilitating a conference in Chaska, Minnesota. So I just wanted to share that because it was a profound ritual that truly surprised me in its depth. Okay, so I said that, and I'll just look here real quick and see if we've got other questions. Tanya's letting us know that she got nothing unpacked, that we held her attention the whole time, which I love.
That's what made me just laugh there. So while you're looking at the comments, one of the things you just said about threshold choirs reminded me of a note that somehow I skipped in my presentation. One of the things that Zoom, and Zoom related, one of the things Zoom just did was they just enhanced their sound. Prior to this week, this month, you could only have one sound coming out of Zoom. So if we all clapped, you only heard whatever the Zoom was picking up at that time, and it's one person at a time. Now they've enhanced their platform, probably because of Hamilton, I think, so that people can sing simultaneously and be heard simultaneously joined. So that allows threshold choirs to sing safely from their own space and transmit it to the home or wherever it needs to go. I'm not in a threshold choir, but I might be now, because that's amazing. And the ability of I'm with you. Like, I resent the technology because I resent that we have to have it. I resent it. I resent COVID. I'm pissed as hell. But knowing that we can connect community more, and not just one-on-ones, but groups, brings a dynamic. And it brings a dynamic that may never even have existed. There's no threshold choir in my area. Now I might be able to join one because it won't matter. There's no way for me to bring some of those resources to clients here. But now, even though I can't see them, touch them, be with them, I may in fact be able to bring the benefit of them.
Yeah, it's both the things. Yeah, thanks for that. What else, everybody? You can raise your hand or let me know if you have any questions or thoughts. Your presentation was so thorough. I feel like everybody might just be satisfied. I know Sarah Jane's saying she had a similar experience to what I shared about Sarah and I, that the vigil also helped her process her grandma's loss from more than a decade prior. Yeah, it was just so surprising. And and I've talked to other people about, when I have maybe people that come to one of my classes that say, well, what do I do now? I hear you talking, and my father died last year and I didn't get to see his body, and now I'm hearing you talk. And I wish that I that I could have touched his body, or that I could have washed him. And I always tell people to just go through the motions as if you are doing it, put a pillow in the bed and shroud it, and put your dad's picture next to it. And that there's the way that we go through the motions with our physical bodies, even if we can't do the actual thing, that we trick our minds into having that trauma care experience. And I'm just always amazed at how well theater works.
Yeah. Ritual is all a little bit theater. And I hate to say that because it sounds profane, but it's true. And it's something that we have to embrace in terms of the reality that we are constructing something, which is what Meyerhoff tries to tell us, that it's artificial. But if we invest in it, it's the meaning behind it. So we can let the theater go because it's replaced by meaning. Shay, Wishna, did you want to jump in?
Yes, I did.
Oh, there you are. Thanks.
And it was a beautiful presentation, Melissa. Thank you so very much. I just wanted to add another component, which has to do with storytelling, and as celebrants and as human beings, we have the ability to have the people who are either vigiling or who are in the who are gathered together in the funerals. We are able to guide them in visualizations where we can have them close their eyes and remember what it feels like to hold the people that they love. Because, and this is something that I got from celebrant and death care worker Dina Stander, that we hold in our centers the memory of every hug and embrace we've ever shared with the people that we care for. So I just want to remind all of us about the powers of being able to get people to close their eyes or relax their gaze and just remember different times before COVID, and remember what it's like to just have that visceral connection with the people that we care about.
Very true, Shay.
Thanks, Shay. That was helpful. Let's see, and I'm not seeing the raised hands as much as I'm seeing the chat box, so great. Oh, there I go. Now I see it. Paula, go ahead.
Thank you. I just listened to a really beautiful, I guess it's the words podcast. I don't really exactly know what some of these conversations are, but conversation between Frank Ostaszewski and Katie Butler. I think it's entitled This Vulnerable Human Life, but they talked about what you were just talking about, Danny. Katie talks about if you can't do the whole home funeral, to wash the body. And that, you know, the idea that your mind can't necessarily take in the loss of the person, but the body can. And so by that process of watching the body, that we align, I guess, or, you know, it starts to move the experience into our awareness and move the grief. And I just, like, that really struck me. And so it's interesting to hear you talk about it too.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like we're having this conversation in Louisville because there's none of this work happening. There's so much interest and no, you know, nothing is happening here yet, really. And, you know, that might be a way to bring people in who aren't really ready for the whole thing yet. And yeah, anything that helps, right?
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And that, you know, that's another big thing that, you know, like you said, there's a lot. You're trying to get a group going in Louisville and the education happening. And that's been a big grief here at NHFA. I mean, we kicked off this year so excited to do and promote community care groups. That was our big mission for the year. And right in the middle of that, you know, we've been just head scratching, like, how do we do community education when we can't get together with our community members? And you know, it's one thing to get together with people that you're already talking with, but to spark new conversations has been really interesting.
Yeah, we had a gathering in February, and like 65 people showed up, you know, a lot of whom I'd never met before, and there was so much energy. And then COVID hit, right? And so it just kind of, it's just on hold, you know, it didn't really fracture, but it has been a challenge.
Yeah.
And people need it so much, you know, they need that connection so much right now. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else? Well, all right. Thanks everyone so much for coming. Oh, yeah, this has been super fulfilling, very interesting. I love the comments. Sally, thanks for just chatting there in the box. It's nice to hear people's stream of consciousness, thoughts, and reactions as it goes on. So just really great to be with everybody tonight. This like I said, has been recorded, so you will get the recording if there's things that you want to re-listen to. If there's things you want to listen to again, resources that you wanted to get from that last slide, you'll be able to find everything in the recording. You should get it probably by Monday or Tuesday. Thank you all so much. For those of you that are not NHFA aligned or, you know, members, please do check out our website. We've been doing a lot of work updating it and reorganizing things, making it a little bit easier to navigate. So that's homefuneralalliance.org. You can keep up with our events and things like that. And yeah, I just look forward to connecting with each of you more and more. Yes, support NHFA with your donation all the time. And Elisa, just thank you so much for sharing your time with us. It's been an absolute
This is like
pleasure.
a fantastic first date. I foresee that there'll be many more in our future, one way or another.
Yes.
I think it's just been like the best blind date ever, Sarah Jane. So much for having
Yeah.
me. It's
Yeah, and keep
amazing.
your eyes out. I was just saying, we're gonna do, Danny Lavore speaks with Elisa's group next.
Yes,
So
we're going to have
do,
Danny in the Celebrant House. It's amazing to come into a group of people and feel immediately at home and to feel immediately with my own. And it doesn't happen very often, and I speak in a lot of places, and it's been just, my heart is so full, and I'm so thrilled that we've made this connection. I think together we have the opportunity to do amazing things for clients all over that really need what we have to bring in our investment in the ethics and the delivery of personalized ritual experience across the continuum. I can't thank you enough for having me. It's just been so great.
Yep. Awesome. All right, everybody. Well, have a great night, and we'll see you back here soon for all the more wonderful NHFA events.